It's good to be with you this morning. I don't know about you, but things felt a little different walking in this morning. It felt better. I walked into the room this morning and the sun is out. Anybody a fan of the sun? I walked in this morning and it was a little warmer outside than it has been all week, and nothing like the negative 100-degree wind chill on the mountains in New Hampshire. But I also walked in feeling a little more comfortable that I was no longer being spied upon by that spy balloon that's been hovering over the country. I want to give you my annual good news as well, because once we hit February 2nd, which is Groundhog Day, I just want you to know winter is almost over. January is the long month. February is short, 28 days. And once you hit March 1st, you know the snow isn't going to last. I also have it on good authority. My guy, MLive, first name, the weather guy on MLive, he is predicting that winter isn't over, but he's looking out at the temperatures and he doesn't see any more bone-chilling cold. So the cold that we experienced is no longer going to happen the rest of the winter. You can believe him or not. I choose to believe. We're in Genesis chapter 14 this morning as we're continuing our series, The One Life Movement. But I need to take a few moments this morning and give a little bit of an explainer about the text. And so if you could participate with me, that'd be great. So once you find Genesis chapter 14 in your Bible, on your phone, just hold it up for a second, would you? When you find Genesis chapter 14. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to take the next 30 seconds in Genesis chapter 14, and I want you to try to read the first 8 verses, okay? So I know I have some music queued up. I think it'll work to help you concentrate. Read these first 8 verses. Ready, go. How'd you do? I need to explain something. There are certain times that you have to bear with me on a Sunday, and part of my calling here at Redemption Church, part of it when I teach is actually loving the fact that Josh Tovey, our lead pastor, carries the weight of teaching here, and from the elders, taking time as part of the teaching team to give him longevity in his ministry. So that actually you don't get less of him, but over time you hear more of him up front teaching. This is not one of those times. I'm up here because he can't read the names. And if you don't believe my theory, I have 4 words that I would like you to read. And so here's the first word up on the screen. All right? And so at the count of 3, again, just humor me a little bit. On the count of 3, read this word out loud. 1, 2, 3. Italy. Wait, it's not. Okay, all right, I'm with you. I agree. It is Italy. Italy. Exactly. So let's put word number 2 up. On the count of 3, read this word for me. 1, 2, 3. Italian. Wait, I feel like I heard something different coming from over here. See, it's not Italy, so it's not called Italian? Is that what you're telling me? I am glad that you agree with me, because our lead pastor thinks a little differently. Let's go with word number 3, all right? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, I like it. I agree. Last word number 4. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Did I hear any Babels out there? In full disclosure, we all might be wrong on Italian. You look up the enunciation, it's more of a UH, Italian, instead of Italian, but it certainly, I know, is not Italian because it's not Italy. Now, in our lead pastor's defense, when we come across passages like this, we go to the ESV, we listen to the audio Bible, and the audio Bible actually supports his Babel. They call it the Tower of Babel, but as far as I'm concerned, he is 0 for 2. Listen, you have a lead pastor who self-admittedly, he agreed this was a joke we were gonna run with. Maybe I took it a step further than he thought I would, but he self-admits that the English language isn't kind to him. Listen, I've had too many head injuries. I can't at times get words out. So I don't know what that means about you and the pastors that you have here at Redemption. If you need some new ones someday, I think Redemption Barbecue or Redemption Kitchen would live on, and so we would still find a way to feed you. Thanks for humoring me. Let's get to what really matters. The question this morning for you is this: how does your worship change your choices? How does your worship change the choices you make? A life can be boiled down to, at times, a series of choices. And I believe specifically, and what we want to continually unpack is worship, and even building off of last week, how we ended with whether you are going to bend the knee before the Lord. It was a first domino to fall, the first domino of worship. And what I want to unpack this morning is the worship effect. But there are so many things over the course of the day that really impact our choices. Let me start with a terrible example. 2 weeks ago, as I'm sitting on my couch on a Sunday afternoon, my sorrow began to grow and grow because my team, the Buffalo Bills, began to lose. And they lost completely. They could not have played worse. And so I'm not as mentally and emotionally strong in those moments, as ridiculous as that is. I admit I care about things that don't matter, but that tested my mental toughness. And immediately, what do I want to do? I want to drown my sorrows in something, specifically food. Let's get something bad to eat to drown my sorrows in some food because the Bills lost. It's terrible. So I went to Core Life, which is not true, but I did go to Core Life in the last week, so don't look at me and think that this guy would never go to Core Life. But I'm not making good choices out of that mental and emotional state. That's a terrible example, but what over the course of the day sets you off mentally, emotionally, that affects you spiritually? What is it over the course of the day that makes you frustrated at school or at work? What are the things that trigger you so that you are short-tempered with your kids? What are the things that trigger you that you're just immediately annoyed if a friend or even your spouse just wants to have conversation with you and just wants to answer questions, but you're just annoyed because you don't want to answer them? There are so many things in our day-to-day that affect our choices. And what I want you to encourage you with again this time, as I was up here the last time, is encourage you to ask 2 questions. I believe as you face those day-to-day obstacles, struggles, tests, there are 2 questions that can bring us back to a place where we're going to use that circumstance as a means and an act of worship. It's what does God want me to know and what does God want me to do? The question, what does God want me to know, I believe will always speak to your identity. There are so many times where we find ourselves in an identity crisis, what we believe about ourselves or what somebody else believes about us. But what we need to hold on to is what God says about us, what he believes to be true about us because of what Jesus has done. So what does God want me to know allows me to be who I am, and then what does God want me to do allows me to respond in the test of the life, in test of relationship, in the test of circumstance and trials, to then turn our focus to worship and a choice that can then be worshipful. When I talk about worship all throughout this morning, certainly we are worshipers, and the who we worship and the what we worship matters. Our focus today is on a purity of worship before the Lord, as I believe we'll see in the text. But I believe worship is experiencing God. Some might push back on worship not being about your experience, but if you are here to worship God and you are not experiencing God, that is a problem. I'm not talking about your experience with entertainment-wise. I'm talking about you knowing, seeing, and believing God. I want to take your attention just to the first miracle of Jesus, turning water into wine. Don't miss the picture in that miracle where he took 6 stone jars that were filled with water that were meant for outward purifying ritual. It was to wash the outside of you. And what does he do? He uses those stone pitchers, turns water into wine, to which these now become pitchers that you are drinking out of. You see, God has not come. He did not send his son Jesus to wash you up on the outside. He came so that he could save you and transform you from the inside out. And this picture of wine in these stone jars is actually you consuming God. That you consume and devour him in the sense that living water, in the sense of bread of life. He is meant to be known, seen, heard. He is meant to be experienced because you have a relationship with him. So I believe worship is knowing God's worth. It is believing that he is worth it all, and then it is giving our whole being to him. Worship is a backdrop all throughout the book of Genesis. It's really actually the backdrop as you see generational and repeated failure. We followed the life of Abraham. We followed his call. We followed his obedience to go into the land. We've followed his fall down to Egypt. And then we have come to even see Abraham's demeanor totally changed last week with Lot in his generosity, but in his trust that God holds his tomorrow. See, worship is at the heart of Abraham's transformation. He is often building altars and calling on the name of the Lord. Building altars and calling on the name of the Lord. Worship is also in Genesis also seen as a pause. Oftentimes you see it as a pause in between the action, as we'll see in Genesis 14 this morning. But what I want you to see is that we want to build on the bending of a knee and see what our worship leads us to. I believe worship changed Abraham's choices, and I believe that we can experience the same as well. There's 2 human experiences here in Genesis chapter 14. It is war and worship. And because I can't read the names either, let's start in verse 8. We'll shorten it up a little bit. If you read with me in Genesis 14:8, it says this: Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim, with Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. How we got to this point? We can look back up in verse 1, and it's actually a very key phrase. It says this: in the days of. This is actually a shift in the writing here by the author, because it is a shift in narrative, because it then now begins to chronicle certain events. But in the days of, Amraphel, king of Shinar, in verse 1 is impactful, because what is Abraham going to be known for in chapter 15? You turn a chapter over, you're going to see Abraham known as the father of nations. This is important to know the events here, because it puts Abraham on the map. It puts Abraham on the map, and you see 4 kings against 5. Your phone Bibles might not include the maps in the back anymore, and so I have a couple maps I want to show you just so we get a picture of what's happening in Genesis 14. The 5 kings, we're going to call them Team Chedorlaomer and Team Sodom. So our 5 kings, if you look over at the Persian Gulf, are sitting through the Tigris and Euphrates River. It's the Mesopotamian river or area, and also the Babylonian area. And so you have 5 kings who are sitting here just north of the Persian Gulf. North of the Tigris River is modern-day Iran. Tigris and Euphrates flow right through modern-day Iraq. Saudi Arabia to the south, and then you have Syria and Israel, and of course Egypt. And so these battles take place in the Middle East, and they're central to two major, really, empires in that time, the Babylonian Empire and Egypt. They're two powers. These areas are made up of city-states, just cities who really each have a king. And what's interesting is that these four kings, if you read through verses 1 through 8, King Chedorlaomer, he's kind of the big wig in the Babylonian area right now. It is he who's kind of leading the charge because the five kings that are located down around the Dead Sea over by the Mediterranean Sea, they have rebelled. Every 12 years, there was some sort of dues needing to be paid, and they weren't paid in that 12th year. And on the 13th year, they rebel. Year 14, they're going to battle. What's interesting is the journey that these four kings take is they could go due east and fight the five kings that are with the king of Sodom. But they choose a different path. One path that makes complete sense because water means life. And so they fouled up north, following the Euphrates River, and would have come down through Syria, down around Damascus. And they don't go right down to the king of Sodom and the kings. They shift over to the Sinai Peninsula. Then they come back up north. All throughout this, the kings, these four kings, are dominating. They're eliminating threats. Partly because of world domination. Might makes things right in this world, and so power made things right. And so they took over several city-states in their journey to battle the king of Sodom and the five kings together south of the Dead Sea. I give you that picture because these are world events. I give you this picture because of what is painted here is war, but war for what cause? I also give you this picture because we learn that there is one man, Lot, brother of Abraham, who gets caught up in all of it. If we zoom in on the second map, we can see I have a red star where you have Salem, a king that we're going to see in just a little bit, and Abraham is probably living about 20 miles south of Salem at this time. What's interesting is that as the four kings journey up next to the Euphrates River and then down south to the Mount Sinai, but then back up to where we see the red star where this battle is taking place, he didn't ever see Abraham as a threat. Abraham's not known as a military threat right now, but he is known as shepherd. He is known as rich. And so there was an opportunity, but a battle that never happened until they captured Lot. Pick up with me in verse 10. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits. These are kind of natural mineral slime pits. They could contain like a tar-like substance, like pitch, that even Noah would have used on the ark. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them. What's interesting about that is that some would argue whether they hid in those bitumen pits or whether they died. I think it could be both, but there also could be a foreshadow here of the kings of Sodom actually falling, which is going to come in later chapters. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy, interesting, Sodom not known as the enemy here. The enemy is Team King Chedorlaomer. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions and went their way. The one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were allies of Abraham. When Abraham heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. That's the end of the war. But in the next few verses, I want you to see the worship. Verse 17, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh. That is the king's valley.
And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abraham gave a tenth of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I made Abram rich.' I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share." What has been helping me in my study of God's word, and I've mentioned it already, is as we look to apply God's word to our lives, the helpful question I have found is, what are the human experiences? So what are the human experiences here in the text? It is both war and worship. I want to ask you 5 questions this morning. 5 questions that I believe will just unveil our worship. It would actually remove the mask of who and what we are worshiping. And the first is this: do you choose war or peace? Do you choose war or peace? These are questions that I believe unveil our worship, and what can help us as we engage with these questions is really looking at our worship. A worship is both relational and experiential, a relationship with God to experience God, his life change, and then it affects your choices. So are you one who chooses war or peace? Here's what I mean. Lot is not caught up in this military battle, this war, by accident. In chapter 13, we see Lot really go live right up next to or up against Sodom. But note what we see here in chapter 14. Lot is no longer next to Sodom. What we see is, in verse 12, they also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom. Lot pursued material gain. Lot pursued a material gain, and it led him to complete material loss. Here's what I love that is fascinating that we saw last week in chapter 13. Lot was able to make a decision based on what he saw. He saw a popular place that was well watered. Now, some would argue that the areas of Sodom, the effect after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is why that land is no longer great anymore, or even some who believe Sodom and Gomorrah is under the Dead Sea. But he made a decision based on what he saw. Abraham continues in his worship to make decisions on what he doesn't see. Can I take a second to take you back to this moment of worship, this blessing from Melchizedek? It says, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High." The name for God here is El Elyon. El would have been a familiar name for all these Canaanite kings because El would have been the name of their sky god. But here, Melchizedek uses this name, God Most High, El Elyon, possessor of heaven and earth. And fast forward next week, I don't want to ruin it, but Abraham is going to get to look at the stars, and he's going to hear the words from God. You can number the stars. I'm going to make your nation great. And as he looks out at the sky, I believe he's remembering El Elyon, God, possessor of the heaven and the earth. And so he sees those stars and he believes what he doesn't see yet because of who God is. He doesn't trust his eyes like Lot did. He trusts God's word. See, Lot, on the other hand, is a picture of a compromised faith. Lot is a picture of a compromised faith. He is the one who actually turns his back on the promised land and pursues material gain. So I ask you, do you have a compromised faith? Are there times and areas in your life that you haven't given over to the Lord and you're going to compromise your faith in those moments, in those seasons to pursue that gain? Because I would propose to you this morning as you ask the question, do you choose war or peace, that you're not on this great bloody battlefield, but it's a war that rages in your own heart, and a compromised faith, I would propose to you, is a declaration of war. Your compromised faith will be a declaration of war against God and the things of the Lord. Secondly, I'd ask you, do you choose to attack or defend? Do you choose to attack or defend? I wonder if Abraham feels at all guilty. You can debate from the outset whether it was right or wrong for Lot to even be with Abraham. The command of God was to leave your family, leave your kinsmen. It's not explicit that Lot being with Abraham was a sin, but look what has happened, and look what happens with Lot along Abraham's journey. And so Abraham, in response to seeing that Lot has been captured, is going to go defend. He's going to go defend. But I think it's important here, as he sees these four kings rush through this land of Canaan, this promised land, Abraham sees two threats. He sees a threat to people, and he sees a threat to the promise. And so he pursues Lot. The picture here is that Lot is safe with Abraham. Can you say that to be true about your relationships? Are people safe with you? Here's the thing in our day and age, and here's the fine line. There's a fine line between critical thinking and being a critic. Listen, if I could choose another life and didn't have a family, and didn't matter what hours I worked, I'd actually probably pursue being a chef. But I think there are other things that I would actually be really good at. I think I would be a really good judge on America's Got Talent or American Idol. I would be really good because I can be a really good critic. I would be really good, I think, at a sports radio station where you're just arguing and bantering and criticizing each and every day. Or maybe I could just be a food critic because that would be great too. But we love to criticize. See, critical thinking, you know it's critical thinking if you are building up. You know you are just being a critic if you are tearing down. And so here's the thing. You can build up or tear down in your relationships. I would follow up this question by just simply asking you, are people safe with you? And what I mean by this is that their sin isn't safe, but their souls are safe with you. Like Lot is safe with Abraham, who is safe with you? Third, I want to ask this. Do you choose to rescue or hold captive? See, I think we can ask our culture even in today how they would view Genesis 14. Certainly you can look out into the western part of our world and see the war that continues between Russia and Ukraine, and what's true in Genesis 14 is true there. Might makes things right. They're trying to act with power to make wrongs right in their eyes. But we live in this culture that I think goes back and forth between the survival of the fittest, equality, and even now an equity. Here's what I mean. Survival of the fittest, it's the war. It's the battle. It's whoever's the strongest is going to win. But we have a shift in our culture where really we see this equity, which in the most dumbed down terms is same starting point, same ending point. We all have the same. But here is where I actually see both of those as very similar, because you're either going to conquer by conquest or by force, or in the world of equity, what we are going to see is there's actually going to be power through manipulation. Because who gets to decide what's equitable? That's what will continue to be the battle in our world. And in between the survival of the fittest and the battle of equity, can I propose a biblical equality that takes us to a place where none are righteous, no, not one. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Because we live in a biblical equity, here's what we're all going to be doing. We're going to be falling flat on our faces, and the only hope that we have is grace. It's grace. Would we live in a world of grace? Because in our world, in all these different worldviews, what is going to have the most impact on our world is grace. And the good news about grace is that grace both defends and grace rescues. And grace has rescued us, and so would we rescue those around us. Question number 4 is this: do you choose to be a giver or a taker? Two contrasts here. In this moment of worshiping God Most High, you have 3 individuals. King Sodom, who's just been rescued by Abraham because he was after his brother Lot in protection of people and the promise, but you also have King of Salem, Melchizedek. But the contrast here is between the king of Sodom's words and Abraham's words. In verse 21, after all that king of Sodom has been through, his first 2 words, and the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me." Take that in contrast to Abraham's words in verse 24. It's not "give me," it's actually his refusal, and he says, "I will take nothing." Which words do you tend to go with? The "give me" or the "I take nothing"? The beauty of this worship service that's really even going on here in a moment is the prayer, the worship of the God Most High, the blessing, but also the giving and the generosity. It's important to note here in this text too is that this is actually the first reference to tithe. It's the first tithe in the Bible, and here Abraham is giving a 10th back to Melchizedek. See, I think this can help us in our principles and generosity because God has been nothing but generous to Abram. And now Abram, it almost even comes somewhat natural in this moment. It's because he has been worshiping the Lord, and it's because he's in a place where he can see the goodness of the Lord, where he has the God Most High in view, and he wants to also respond in generosity towards others. We've talked about generosity here at Redemption Church, and really the encouragement to you is that make tithe your starting point. And make tithe 10%, this 10% as a starting point. Allow God to move you, whether increase or decrease your giving from that point, because hear what tithe implies here. See, why would Abraham be giving anything to Melchizedek? He doesn't know him, he didn't help in the battle, he wasn't part of this conquest. But what is in view here is Abraham is giving a tithe to Melchizedek because a tithe in this part of history was seen as 2 specific things: the word superiority and subjection. Melchizedek, this priest king of Salem, Abraham sees as superior. Abraham also then gives a tithe to fall under subjection. And so these 2 words can define all of our generosity here at Redemption Church as we give back to the Lord. As you look at your own generosity, you have because God has already given, like Abraham. God has been generous with you, and so how are you going to be generous with what God has given you? And you fall under in joyful, cheerful, and sacrificial giving before the Lord because your God is superior to you, and you want to fall in subjection under him. This tithe is gratitude. It's the worship of gratitude. And so it comes back to us in our own lives, in our own sphere of influences, with our own time, talents, and treasures. Is it a give me, or is it I will take nothing? Do you live your life as a giver or a taker? 5th and last question. Do you choose to advocate for your own favor or others? What's fascinating here is that the king of Sodom is so quick to gain favor in the eyes of Melchizedek and Abram. He's lost everything, And he's on the road back to Sodom from the battle, and they're traveling from up north as we saw Abraham chase down the 4 kings of Team Kedalomar. And they're returning back past Salem and back down south of the Dead Sea to return home. But he's trying to gain favor in front of Abraham. Don't miss the irony here. He's trying not to gain favor for his people, not to gain favor for his city. He's trying to gain favor for himself. And in a few chapters, we're going to see a role reversal where Abraham is standing before God, advocating for Sodom and the people of Sodom. Well, will you save the city for 50 righteous people? It's fascinating. What the king of Sodom brings versus what the king of Salem brings. Abraham, in a few chapters, is going to be advocating for Sodom. An incredible picture. But also you have Melchizedek here, who is completely advocating for Abraham. Blessed be Abram by God Most High. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies in your hand. What do you bring? Certainly some of those things and some of these questions are relatable. And maybe you're not on the bloody battlefield going to war, but we ask the question, do you attack or defend? Because there are small battles throughout your day with yourself, with the Lord, and with others. Are you a giver or a taker? Are you advocating for others? Really, is grace, the grace that you have received, is it dominating your life because it's out of that worship and receiving the grace of God that then allows it to flow through you to one another? Just 5 questions this morning, simple questions, but I think they can go to the depths of our soul, the depths of our day to day. And would we simply hold on to this morning and pursue this? Gospel takeaway this morning is worship is our breakthrough from all our natural tendencies. Worship is our breakthrough from our flesh. The pure worship that is knowing God's worth, that is believing he is worth it all and giving him your whole being. That's the worship that will be a breakthrough from your natural tendency to go to war, for your natural tendency to attack, for your natural tendency to hold captive relationships, people, things in your life. Worship will be your breakthrough against the give me attitude, trying to save yourself. See, it's that self-preservation, the self-advancement, the self-esteem, and just the flat-out selfishness that destroys our worship. Worship transforms Abraham. It's Abraham's continually calling out to the Lord that will transform him. It's the altars that he builds in remembrance to God that continually transform him. Will you allow worship to transform you? If you go to Hebrews chapter 11, you see 3 by faith statements. By faith, Abraham obeyed. By faith, Abraham went to live in the land of promise, and by faith, Abraham offers Isaac. Said a different way, Abraham is seen living by faith when he's walking with the Lord, when he's dwelling in the Lord's presence, and when he's sacrificing. So what does that look like for you this morning? What does it look like to be walking with the Lord, to be dwelling in his presence, and to be sacrificing before the Lord? What does it look like for you to call on the name of the Lord? What kind of altars do you need to build this morning? See, Abraham has these rhythms of worship. When Abraham is failing, it's because he's abandoned the rhythms of worship in his life. And can I ask you, what rhythms of worship are you pulling away from? What rhythms of worship are you replacing with selfishness, replacing with this world, replacing with other things? See, worship in Genesis is seen as this pause, but it's this pause from everything else going on in life. It's this pause from war in Genesis 14. You're here today to pause in worship, to get away from what's happening outside these walls so you can focus in this moment on God, who he is and what he has done through Jesus. But here's the thing. Though we pause life to worship, we should never pause worship as we go live our lives. An altar, it was a consecrated place, a place that was defined as holy. What would it look like for you, the different places and relationships in your life, to have conversations to declare them holy? What kind of altar do you need to build in your home, in your marriage, in your parenting, with your friends? What if it's just as practical as you're gonna declare your phone an altar before the Lord? It's gonna be a holy place. You're gonna declare your workplace an altar before the Lord. It's gonna be a holy place. You're gonna declare your relationships, your family, everything you have, you're gonna consecrate it before the Lord because it is holy, because Jesus has saved you and you now desire to live for him. If worship is our breakthrough, then what rhythms of worship do you need to establish right here, right now? One last thing this morning. I don't want to miss Melchizedek. Melchizedek deserves his own study. But there are actually so many things being foreshadowed in Genesis 14, and we would miss a huge one if we missed Melchizedek. He's king of Salem. Melchizedek means righteous king. Salem, short for Jerusalem. Jeru meaning city of, and Salem meaning peace. So Melchizedek, righteous king of a city of peace. He's a king and a priest, which actually wouldn't have been allowed under the Mosaic law and the Levitical system. That hasn't been established yet. And he's this priest that is a representative of God. What's fascinating is that the king of Sodom and the king of Salem are both Canaanite kings. They're from the cursed line of Ham. But righteousness, peace, priest, king, don't miss, he comes with bread and wine as well. This is not communion. The Lord's Supper hasn't been established, but don't miss the picture. Priest, king, righteous, peace, cup and bread out of Jerusalem. Because one day, it's not going to be Melchizedek who is reminding Abraham about God, who has given you all the blessing, who has given you this victory. It's God and God alone. Melchizedek for us reminds us of Jesus, the priest king with peace and blessing and forgiveness and bread and cup that was blood and body broken for you and I. Jesus is the greater Melchizedek. Does Jesus have the whole of you? Listen, I'm up here as a broken man. I think I've been more impacted recently in my life and battling that no one in my life has gotten my best. I don't think God has gotten my best. I don't think my wife has gotten my best. I don't think my kids have gotten my best. I don't think my family. I don't think you have gotten my best. But I know that breakthrough is going to come through worship. A worship that gives all of me to all of him. And if that's you today, then why don't we start worshiping now? Heavenly Father, what I love about Genesis 14, unique chapter, that it takes a broad scope of what's happening in the world. It continues to walk specifically through the life of Abraham.
Yet, quite simply, it points us to you. Lord, I don't believe I'm the only one in this room that desires breakthrough, that needs breakthrough. Lord, so would you move and work? And would we simply love you because you have first loved us? And in our brokenness, day to day, would we just give you our all? In all our failings, in all our shortcomings, but in all your goodness, in all your righteousness, in all your peace, would we give you our all? In your name we pray.